Thank you for listening to the ThePPod from the Somerset Safeguarding Children Partnership. Please note, due to the nature of this podcast, themes relating to the abuse and neglect of children are discussed, with the content being designed for an adult audience for educational purposes in order to protect children from harm. Therefore, listener discretion is advised and the content unsuitable for children.
Welcome to the ThePPod.
Before we begin today's episode, we just wanted to thank you for listening and for all of the really positive feedback we've received. Now, if you enjoy listening to the ThePPod, we really appreciate it if you took the time to follow or subscribe to us on your chosen platform, or even better, leave us a review to let other people know about it. It really does help to spread the word. And talking about spreading the word, don't forget to tell others about it and encourage them to join us here as well. We really do appreciate the feedback we get, so don't forget you can email us at theppod@somerset.gov.uk if you have any questions or comments on any of the episodes, or if you'd like to be involved in any future episodes. We really do want to hear from you. So, enough from me, let's get on with today's episode. Welcome back to the ThePPod, everybody, and I'm really pleased today to be joined by a real specialist in a particular field here, and talking to us about a subject that potentially people may have heard of but not really have much of a great understanding behind. And today's topic is looking at spiritual and ritualistic abuse, including accusations of witchcraft. And I'm really pleased today to be joined by Jordan Alexander. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm very excited about this.
Thanks for having me here today. My name is Jordan Alexander. I am the founder and CEO of Prism Training. And in addition to that, I'm also the national chairperson for a parliamentary forum created in 2011 called the National Working Group Tackling Abuse Linked to Accusations of Witchcraft and Spirit Possession here in the UK.
That's great, thank you. So, before we get into it, could you maybe just sort of talk to us about sort of what your role is? I know how did you sort of come into this kind of line of work?
It's a long story, is that one? So I was a police officer for 20 years. So as a detective sergeant, I worked in Greater Manchester Police, the Metropolitan Police, and then West Yorkshire Police. And throughout my career, it was about 10 years ago now, and I came across an investigation involving a child who was going to be taken for a ritual, and there was no further information than that, but there was a safeguarding concern. Now, for those of you who worked in frontline services, we had taught about Human Rights Act time and time again, and I remember one article of the Human Rights Act that says, you cannot interfere or infringe upon someone's beliefs. Everyone has the right to believe in whatever they want to. But then my safeguarding and professional head was saying, but there's someone at risk here and it might need safeguarding. How do I go and talk to someone or approach this subject without potentially interfering with their beliefs if it's involving a ritual or something spiritual, etc.? I really got into a bit of a sticky wicket in my own head of like, how do I do this? What do I do? I can't ignore it, but should I ignore it? And it's not too dissimilar to what I hear so many people going through nowadays. And through that, I then found the National Working Group, which was set up, like I say, in 2011. And it's consorted of a number of agencies from across the UK who come together sharing best practice information. And it was following the death of the likes of Victoria Climbié or Adam the Boy in the River, who were sadly killed as a result of spiritual and ritualistic beliefs. That case, I was then able to tackle and approach the family with respect and understanding of their beliefs while also being able to safeguard them. And for those of you who worked in frontline services, you'll know as soon as you've done one thing well once, you then become a bit of an expert, even if you're not. And these type of investigations kept on coming my way, and they kept calling Jordan jobs. And they kind of stuck with me over the years. And the more cases I did, I was getting positive results. And it just became something I did. And then 2017, I worked on an investigation involving a young boy again, who had been taken for a ritual involving being cut and bled to remove the evil spirits from within his body by a father and a witch doctor. That case went to court, and it was the first case ever in the UK where spiritual and ritualistic abuse was recognised as an aggravating factor towards child abuse in this case. It's a really big case in terms of opening the floodgates of litigation and getting these type of abuse recognised in society and within the media and within the judicial system. What I then realised after that was that I was the only one working on these investigations, and everyone was coming to me for guidance and advice, which I was happy to help with. But then I thought, well, why not just help people even more by putting together something to do with training? And so I put together like a 2-hour training piece back then, which we used to deliver to police services, social services, NHS. And then a couple of years after that, I got that CPD accredited. A very difficult job. If anyone's ever gone for CPD accreditation, it is not easy, especially when it's a subject they have nothing to compare it to. It took about 6 months, but we did get the accreditation, and it is a now certified and qualified course that people can attend and learn about. And it just kind of goes from strength to strength. And then in May, just last year gone, I was elected to take over the National Working Group, taking it in a very different direction, much more inclusive. We've now got over 60 organisations involved in the National Working Group, including CPS, NHS England, Royal College of Midwives, Border Force, Immigration, Police, NSPCC. The list is endless, it really is. And we're so proud of it. But it's everyone coming together at a much more strategic level to bring about positive change, so that people who are listening to this podcast and think, actually, there is support out there. And it's not just this chap called Jordan on his own who I can call, but there's loads of different people who are now understanding this and aware of this. And we're now recognizing that it's not just child abuse this is embedded within. It's actually all abuse forms that we all know a lot about: FGM, forced marriage, violence against women and girls, honour-based abuse, domestic abuse, but where people are using this form of abuse as a justification to start that abusive process. And that's what I'm now working with at a national and strategic level to stop, including hopefully bringing an amendment to some key legislation.
Sounds like you've got a busy time on your hands. There's a lot to do. And just to kind of set an understanding then, when we're talking about spiritual and ritualistic, I can't say that word.
Sorry.
When we're talking about spiritual and ritualistic abuse, what is it we're sort of talking about? And you talked at the start about sort of anxiety, if you like, early on in your sort of career around this, around actually balancing personal rights and rights around people being able to have their own belief systems. So I guess the sort of question is, what are we talking about here, and how does that kind of intersect with kind of normal, what would be considered, I guess, normal faith practices, and what are the sort of key beliefs or rituals that might be sort of involving children or adults?
A few questions there. Okay, if we start with, you mentioned the word normal, and I think that's a safe thing to say, because what you believe in isn't going to be the same as what anyone else believes in or what I believe in. And I think the first message is that there's nothing anywhere that says my beliefs are better than yours. Yeah. And that's the first hurdle you've got to get past. If you start judging other people's beliefs based upon what you believe, you're going to miss the opportunity to safeguard them. And it's easy to do. We've all been brought up to believe certain things within our own lifestyle, culture, faith, spirituality, superstitions, even traditions, not putting new shoes on the table, don't walk on a crack on the pavement, don't walk on 3 grates, salute a magpie if you see it, but someone else might look at you going, what are you doing that for? That's weird. Mm-hmm. The same way, if you're an opportunity to safeguard someone, if you react that way, they're going to think, oh, actually, you're just being rude now, it's a bit disrespectful. Yeah. So there's that. In terms of the faith-based and some of the terminology potentially you'd be looking for, it's not necessarily differently. What I hear so often is this is a cultural thing. It's not as a cultural thing. It's a safeguarding thing. Anyone can be an abuser. Anyone can be a victim. Anyone can be a survivor of this form of abuse. And we're seeing that in more and more cases that are ongoing. The intersection between spiritual and ritualistic abuse and like what we're saying here, and the intersection, I would quite easily say terminology like exorcisms, deliverances, rituals like ruqya. I do a lot of work with a lot of faith organisations at a national level, like the Catholic Safeguarding Society, Church of England, Methodist Church, various different imams. And we've done a lot of work together in a positive way. And I can tell you right now that children are not allowed to go for exorcisms. They can't consent. They can't consent to that process, and a parent can't consent on their behalf. So the first thing you should be looking out for is for a child's going for an exorcism. It technically shouldn't be done, and that's a safeguarding concern. And that's endorsed with Catholic doctrine, Church of England. They all say we do not perform exorcisms, deliverances, these rituals on children because it's just cruel and it's abuse. In terms of adults, I would probably say that as consenting adults like you and I are, Steve, if I woke up tomorrow morning and decided I felt a bit different, something wasn't quite right, and I decided to seek out an exorcism on my own, what we say is that's fine, because you're making that decision. You're a consenting adult, you have capacity. However, if for example, it's you, Steve, that says to me, "Oh, Jordan, you're acting a bit funny, maybe you're possessed. Come on, I'll take you down to the local church and get an exorcism sorted out." You're manipulating, you're controlling, you're coercing me into something that potentially I wouldn't have otherwise done. There's a big case that was just before Christmas involving a woman who had taken a child for FGM. And I think the sentencing is due in a few months. Now, her defense is that she only did that because if she hadn't done that, then her community or someone within her community would have put a curse on her. And that seems to have been lost in translation a lot throughout this case of just how impactful that is upon someone. Potentially, there's no excuse for FGM, I would just put that out there, but the level of pressure and coercion that she's been put under to do something that she would never have normally have done through fear of this curse, something which she's been brought up to believe is real and is true, is powerful. And it can lead people to do things that, like I say, they wouldn't usually do, including abusing the people. But then we have the other spin of it, of where people will perform these rituals, exorcisms, spiritual beliefs, whatever it is, as a way of removing evil spirits from a loved one, family member, partner, or even a child, because they feel it's in their best interests. They know best. And again, it's their culture, their beliefs, their society, their community, and who are we to interfere? Again, we're not to interfere with the belief itself, but here's the sort of soundbite. You've got to not use your belief to justify harming someone else. So, I say, for example, I believed in that if you saw two magpies on the street, it meant that I had to go and hurt someone. And I walked up to you, Steve, and I punched you in the face. And I said, "Steve, I'm really sorry. Two magpies, I had to do it." What would you feel about that? You say, "Oh, okay, that's fine then, Jordan. If there's two magpies there, I get it. It's reasonable, is that?" You'd be like, "No, that's not a justification to punch me in the face and hurt me." I know it's a bit of a different context, but it's the same sort of methodology that some people say, "Well, actually, I was allowed to do that because my belief told me so." We would say here, that's not the case at all.
So just to understand, you mentioned there in terms of investigations and have taken place into, you mentioned the Anglican Church there, the Catholic Church, other kind of established kind of Western religions. And we've obviously seen that in things like the Independent Inquiry into Child Sexual Abuse in England and Wales. But what we're sort of talking about today is slightly different to that, in that it's around that the beliefs justifying or being a cause for abuse that takes place, as opposed to abuse taking place within those settings. Would that be a fair sort of description?
Absolutely, yeah. I would say that the abuse within those settings doesn't take place as much as potentially some people would like it to be. I think some people stereotype and stigmatise a lot of the faith organisations in the UK based upon what we see in the press. We see one article and we say, "Well, we've seen this 1,000 times before, and therefore, that church is bad, that church is good, that faith is good, that faith is bad." But what we're not seeing reported in press is all these cases of people doing it in their own homes. Let me give you an example. Last year in India and Bangladesh, approximately 9,500 women were killed through accusations of witchcraft. And now in India and Bangladesh, it's legal by law. You can literally walk up to someone in the street, Steve, in India, and go, "She's a witch." As a result of that, she will then be beaten, flogged, and potentially even killed, dragged through the street naked, because you've said she's a witch. And if she falls into the lower two castes within that community, she has no defense. Yeah. how dangerous must that be in India, just in Bangladesh alone? Then what we're often misled to believe is, well, that happens in Bangladesh. And you're right, we're not seeing women dragged through the street, beaten naked, etc. here in the UK, and that's a good thing. But that's not to say it's not happening behind closed doors. The same sort of practices, accusations, and abuse. And that's what we're missing out on here. We're assuming that everything's linked to one thing when it's individuals often acting on their own because of their own interpretation of faith, spirituality, beliefs, etc. And they've manipulated it to make it fit what they're doing.
So I was going to ask you, because I think it's, like you say, often the thing that comes up, particularly when we talk about accusations in relation to witchcraft and things. And are there kind of patterns that we see from certain communities, certain places in the world, or is it literally across the broad spectrum of the world, really?
It's across the broad spectrum of the world. We just call it different things depending on different communities and different societies. So, for example, in Ghana, Nigeria, the term juju is used a lot. If you're a Democratic Republic of the Congo, it's kindoki. China, Tibet, India, Bangladesh, the dakini. If Japan, they have the kitsune, which is a type of fox demon that will inhabit your body, and you'll develop sharper teeth and a pointy nose, believe it or not, and you'll develop dementia, often only women as well. In Brazil, Latin America's evil eye, black magic, Santeria. It's all different terminology, but when you break it all down, the beliefs are the same. But ultimately, the people using these beliefs to inflict harm are all saying it's the same thing. Now, in the UK, we live in a multi-diverse society, and that's something I'm really proud of, because we are stronger together as one, learning about each other. But I think some people sometimes forget that people don't just move to the UK for education, visit family and friends, work. And the minute they get off that plane and go through customs, go, ooh, everything I've ever been brought up to believe in doesn't exist anymore. Yeah. Their beliefs, like our beliefs, are embedded within us. You will see me salute the magpie when I walk down the street. I can't help it. I just do it. Yeah, I know it doesn't really mean anything to a lot of people, but to me, I'm like, it's a case of I do it just in case anything goes wrong.
And it's funny, isn't it? Like we have so many practices within our culture, within the UK, that you don't even think about. The fact that somebody sneezes and you say "bless you" instantly, without, and it's right the way across the board. And I think one of the important things for me around this is that for the practices that we do on a daily basis, that I do, when somebody sneezes, say "bless you," see a magpie, hello, Mr. Magpie, all of these kind of things, they're just kind of completely normal. They're part of our lives, even if, the back of my head's thinking, okay, well, Mr. Magpie is probably not going to bring me bad luck, but, I'll do it anyway. But actually, I think sometimes that lack of understanding of actually when there are these very harmful beliefs sometimes, the understanding that actually that's not just something that somebody's come up with. Actually, that's quite inherent in actually, I really genuinely believe this. And I was reading recently about the Black Axe in Nigeria. I don't know if you know about Black Axe. It was more in the context of computer hacking and fraud and this sort of thing. But the ritualistic abuse that takes place within Black Axe of sometimes involving human sacrifice in order to make you a better scammer, or, sacrificing animals or harming yourself or other people. Actually, very, very kind of inherent in that belief system that this is true. This is the truth, as we see it. And that's kind of part of life. In fact, it was very interesting because there was a reporter on this. I believe there was a documentary on Channel 4, I think it was, around Black Axe. And even those who were supporting the journalist gave him a talisman to say, well, this will protect you, as part of this. And it was a genuine belief. It wasn't just kind of, this would be nice to do. It was a genuine belief. And I think that's quite hard for people to understand sometimes if you're not within that sort of culture, if you've not been grown up in that. But I think it's useful sometimes to relate it back to ourselves and actually, like I say, those things that we do without giving it a second thought, really.
You're absolutely right. And I think there's some key points just to pick up on there. I'll come back to bless you and see if you know where that comes from. A lot of people always say it's because of the plague in 1666. It actually goes way, way further back than that. But you mentioned obviously about practices being harmful. If I walk down the street and salute a magpie, it's not harming anyone.
Yeah.
But you also said that's something that's quite normal. You'd be really surprised. People in Scotland have never heard of this. I've had so many Scottish delegates mixed in the audience with people from different parts of the UK. And as soon as you mention magpie saluting, or hello, Mr. Magpie, how's your wife? They look around the room going, oh, what on earth? What do you mean? You salute birds? Why would you do that?
Yeah.
And it's interesting, they're only across the border. They're not far away, but people in Scotland have never heard of this. People abroad have never heard of this. So they see us, or they might see you walking down the street, Steve, and going, oh, good morning, Mr. Magpie. And they walk past you going, oh, he needs sectioning. He's talking to magpies. So what we consider normal, other people might not. And that's where that barrier needs to drop, because if we are starting to disrespect people or frown upon people for having different beliefs to us, it's no different to how they'd look at you saluting magpies. Is it harmful saluting magpies? No, it's not. Are some of the things I've already spoken to about, like juju, black magic, dakini, etc., are they harmful? Believe it or not, they were never created with the intent of being harmful. Black magic, for example, if you're having low mood, for example, one day, you can go and seek out a black magic practitioner, and it's holistic therapy, and it's meant to give you a bit of uplifting and help you out. No different to me and you going to acupuncture or Reiki or yoga, if I'm honest with you. Juju, dakini, all these things were meant originally as a very positive, even faith-based, or even some would say religious-based way of doing things. The same way religion isn't meant to be negative. Some people will have that connotation, but ultimately the main key message with all religions is be kind to each other and love each other. That's the main message. But however, interpretation over the years has changed, and different people have different interpretations of it. And that's when people are now using beliefs in a negative way sometimes, or a way of controlling, coercing people into exploitation, abuse, and sadly in some cases even murder, because they've been told it means one thing, and therefore that's how they're only going to believe it. And you can't go and tell someone that they're wrong, because that's just rude. If I told you to stop saying love to magpies now, could you really do it?
Well, and it's rude, but also I think what we tend to see is it has the adverse effect in that it then strengthens somebody's resolve to say, well, actually, I'm minoritized, and actually I'm feeling like I'm in a position to have to defend myself, I guess, and that then reinforcing those beliefs even more. So I think there's a danger in that, isn't there?
There's also do you lose the opportunity to safeguard? A key example of that is Adam, the boy in the river from 2001, who was a young boy who washed up on the side of the River Thames next to the Globe Theatre, who was trafficked into the UK for what's called a muti murder, or a ritual sacrifice. The frontline agencies did a lot of work with the community to try and ascertain who it was, where it came from. And it wasn't long before the community turned their backs on the frontline agencies, because they were quite disrespectful. They've said this. They were quite offensive. They didn't understand these beliefs. And so all that happened was that community went, see you later. You can get out of my house now. Close the door. 23 years later, that's still an open case, unsolved. His name's not actually Adam. That's just a name that was assigned to him because they have no name for him. That's how the community would not talk. They wouldn't say anything. You get one opportunity to safeguard everyone, Steve, if you get a chance. You might get two if you get lucky. Yeah, if you go in there and you're disrespectful because of what someone else believes and you don't understand it, they're just going to say leave. And 9 times out of 10, unless you're a police officer, you don't have the option but to leave.
Where we are in Somerset here, we have certain areas that are sort of known for more of an alternative lifestyle. I've got Glastonbury Tor. We've got not a million miles away from where I am right now, and often sort of priding itself on its alternative communities, quite an active kind of witch community within those communities. And I see sometimes that sort of creates fear in people of, oh my God, there's witches around this place. In fact, if you go into one of the cafes, you'll see elves and warlocks and Vikings and all sorts in there as well. But it's interesting how that can create a fear of the unknown, whereas actually, I think if you speak to the vast majority of witches within the Glastonbury area, for example, they will talk in terms of themselves and their identity very much as kind of white witches, very much about healing, about support, about love. And like you say, if that's not really understood, there can be some real misconceptions around that community.
You're absolutely right. I actually read in one of your local papers in Somerset in 2021, I think it was a woman who came forward who does identify as being a witch, like you say, white witch, lives at one with the earth, pagan potentially, not doing any harm to anyone. They have their own beliefs. They're not harmful, but because other people don't understand it, was being accused of being a witch. Now, she said in the article, she had no issue with being accused of being a witch because she was a witch. It's like saying someone to me, you're a Christian. Well, yeah, and it doesn't really. But then when you accuse someone of being a witch, it takes us back 400 years to the Elizabethan age, where that meant something very harmful.
Sure.
So we have one part where what someone believes in is not harmful, but then people, by simply accusing and pointing fingers, are making it into something very negative and harmful. That's what's going on in likes of India, Bangladesh, Africa, Latin Americas, even North America right now. We outlawed it in 1735 with the Witchcraft Act, which said, you can't accuse someone of being a witch. And that was reinforced in 1951 with the updated Witchcraft Act. But that's the only legislation we have to work with here in the UK. Yeah. One of the things I'm trying to do here at National Working Group is work with Parliament to bring in updated legislation rather than rely on legislation that's 80 years old. I get asked so many times, like, well, why do we need new legislation? We've got the Children's Act, we've got the Care Act, we've got the Domestic Abuse Act, etc. And I'm like, well, yeah. And which part of those acts of Parliament cover spiritual and ritualistic abuse that says someone in a position of trust can force you into an exorcism against your will? Because what we're then seeing is like CPS, sadly, police, and even judges saying, well, it's not really for us, no crime, see you later. We've got to get past this.
I think sometimes, obviously, that things are fairly black and white to some extent, as they can be within this world of actually this is clear abuse that's taking place. I kind of feel there's a big potential sort of grey area in the middle sometimes. So you may disagree, I don't know, but I'm just thinking, just going back to what we're just talking about in the Glastonbury area. I know, for example, there's quite a large free birthing sort of movement there as well, and searching around free birthing, and often that is sort of associated with more of a widely could be classed as a kind of more alternative lifestyle. How would you kind of navigate that? Would you sort of see that as, because obviously there are potential risks, but then also there are people's rights to free birth. There's nothing in law that says you have to give birth in a certain way. It's quite a sort of it's quite a labyrinth sometimes potentially to kind of negotiate. Would you feel?
I don't think it is. If I'm honest with you, I think it's quite easy to navigate because it's respecting someone's rights and wishes. You're absolutely right. There's nothing in law that says someone has to go and give birth in a hospital. Or someone has to give birth on. There's nothing guidance that says this is how you must give birth. It doesn't exist. So we have to respect the rights as per the Human Rights Act that everyone can do and believe in whatever they want to, as long as they're not placing someone at risk. So, for example, if someone wanted to give birth in a woodland or a field, no issue like that. But obviously, make sure things are in place to make sure that everybody, including the unborn child, is safe. If there's complications, make sure there's a contingency plan in place. It's no different to giving birth at home, if I'm honest with you. Probably a little bit more risky in the sense of, opportunities to get ambulances and things there. But again, these things can be managed if planned and worked in partnership with other people. The only thing I would say about free birthing is if someone has in complications with a pregnancy or a birth procedure, obviously having that contingency in place to make sure that if they wanted to and if they needed to, they got to hospital so that the unborn child could be protected, because that's when some legislation could kick in that you've purposefully put someone at risk, including yourself. It may also be that the person giving birth has been taken there by someone else. We never know. It comes down to capacity, choice, a voice, and ultimately making sure everyone's safeguarded.
And that power balance that you mentioned earlier as well, isn't it? And that actually, is there control? Is there coercion taking place? Is this somebody's free choice to do this? Is there that power balance there around that sort of decision making and kind capacity and choice and freedom within
you
that.
You could say the same thing about if somebody wanted to go and dance naked under the full moon. It's not harming anybody if it's done in the woods in the middle of the night time, and obviously it's a safe space, and you've made sure that obviously other people, including children, can't see you doing it, etc. like that, and you've taken appropriate safeguarding measures. Of course, if you're running through the city centre and you're bearing all to everyone, it's a different matter, because that could be seen as flashing or actually even like sexual incitement for some people. It's about making sure right safeguarding measures are followed, and also making sure people are involved. So like free birthing, are children's services involved? Is a midwife involved? Is it a qualified midwife? Is it someone who can act appropriately if something was needed to be done?
So in terms of kind of identifying signs of abuse, when we're talking about spiritual and ritualistic abuse, what sort of signs or indicators should people be aware of to kind of identify potential abuse linked to faith or belief?
This is a really good question, and I get asked this a lot, because ultimately, on the face of it, there aren't any, if I'm honest with you. So every case I've ever worked on, people haven't come to me and said, help me, I'm being spiritually abused, because they don't know it themselves. Because they've been brought up to believe that the abuse that they're being subjected to is completely normal. You mentioned the word normal before. It's completely normal to them. So they don't see it as abuse. So it's getting past those initial conversations to help them realise what it is, but also fact find and find out what it is they've been through, so that you can actually understand that it's abuse as per the definition of abuse within legislation and guidance, etc. There are, though, some key significant indicators that relate only to spiritual and ritualistic abuse I've come across over the years. So first, there's quite an obvious one, which would be ligature marks or restraint marks, usually around the wrists, especially on children. So children who are usually taken for this sort of procedures, as an example, and I'm sorry to use this one of the first cases I worked on was 2 children who had been taken for kindoki. And as part of that, they had been tied to a chair by their wrists and had their mouths sewn shut. Now, no anaesthetic had been done, no medical intervention, etc. And obviously that's quite a horrific process to go through. And as a result of the children struggling because of the pain, there were significant ligature marks. Obviously, there was also marks on the face. I've got to say that as well.
Sure.
But another key significant indicator for this, I would say, is tiny cuts. So one of the cases that I worked on in 2017, which opened the floodgates litigation I mentioned earlier, was a young boy, and he had all these tiny little razor marks, as if cut by a razor blade, probably about 2 centimetres long each, all across his back and his head. And that had been done to bleed out the evil spirits within him. Key marks, they're usually on the back, if I'm honest with you. There'll never be markings on the face. There's never markings that are visible. And it's, another one as well in terms of witchcraft, and again, this depends on the community and the society, is that if a child's been branded or labelled as a witch, they often are deemed to be contagious. So you can't have skin-on-skin contact. So you'll often find the child or person who's been labelled as a witch not being touched, or someone wearing gloves, or they'll be positioned in a room so that they can't come into contact with them. One of the key things from the Victoria Columbier case on the review, it mentioned how she was sat in the middle of a room when children's services went there. She was sat cross-legged, pretty dressed, quietly, well behaved, no safeguarding concerns. And it's only afterwards when other agencies have read that and gone, actually, that's a key significant indicator, because she's been put right there in the middle of the room on purpose so that nobody could accidentally or on purpose come into contact with her and become a witch themselves because of that. That was that family's belief, or that household's belief, I should say.
Would you say on the back of that, the sort of education is really key around this? Because like you say, there are some things where we may be quite skilled, quite trained around sort of things to identify, things to spot in terms of kind of indications of abuse. And would you feel it's more about sort of educating about those wider understandings around abuse, like such as this?
So, like I put together a training course 7 years ago now, I suppose, which has been pushed out to a lot of organisations up and down the country. And it's interesting because when they come on the training, they then go, "Oh, I've seen this actually myself." I usually always get held back for about 10 minutes by delegates saying, "Got this case right, and let me just run it past you."
I just want to talk to you about something for a second. Just get your thoughts for a second.
Yeah. Just on Monday this week, I delivered training to a charity in Essex, and they've got 3 cases. So they kept me back for about half an hour going, "We've got this one child, we've got this one woman, we've got this, we've got that." And all of a sudden, it's like all these things that they've never thought to consider. And they've sat down and said, "Right, we're going to reopen this case. We need to reopen that one. That one's gone going. We didn't realise what it was until you've now mentioned it. But everything you just mentioned in your training is in this package right here on this case." And it's interesting how important training and awareness is. There's not that many people who do training. I've got the only CPD accredited training in the UK. There are other people who do like webinars now and again, or peace talks, for example. But yeah, I would simply say if you want to learn more, have a quick Google and find out what's out there, and go and listen and learn, and embrace the fact that this is happening in the UK. Don't just put your blinkers on and think, right, chances are I'm never going to come across an investigation like this because they're quite rare. We said that after the death of Victoria Climbié in the papers, we all said it's a one-off case. Yes, there was lessons to be learned, but it would never happen again. And then 6 months later, the young boy Adam's torso washed up inside the River Thames. A few years after that, Christy Babu was killed because he was labelled a witch. Aisha Ali, case after case after case, and that's just children. Domestic abuse cases, women predominantly killed by their husbands over years. We had a case just last year involving a GP in Grimsby, Hossam Wetwali, who had attempted to kill his girlfriend through exorcisms. A GP, someone you would never think could harm someone else, and had been poisoning her while performing rituals and exorcisms on her to remove evil spirits from her, but also nearly killing her in doing so.
Are there any sort of initiatives or education programs within specific communities across the UK at all?
There are, yes. Different communities do hold different trainings and different initiatives. There's a company called Afruka, who are based in Manchester. They do a lot in terms of supporting the African community, as does NAFSA, and also the Victoria Climbié Foundation. 3 organisations I'm really, really proud of, having worked alongside them in the past. Over the years, they do a lot. In terms of other cultures or communities, there are many, many out there. The list is endless. There really is. But it's, there's guidance and support for everyone out there.
Going back as well to something you were talking about earlier in terms of the kind of legal frameworks, and you talked about back in 1950 was the last legislation specifically around witchcraft, over 70 years ago now. We've got the Children Act, 1989, 2004, but that sort of need, the feeling of the need to update, make sure we've got sort of up-to-date, effective legislation. I mean, in terms of kind of the legal frameworks around sort of addressing these issues, what sort of challenges would you say exist within the current kind of legal framework that we've got, kind of enforcing the laws around this topic?
There isn't any, basically. To be very short and sweet, there isn't enough there. What you see is that frontline services, CPS and the judiciary all say the same thing of like, well, they've got no legislation really to refer to that helps them in terms of making charges, prosecutions and convictions in this area of abuse. And it bounces back then to being a cultural thing or a spiritual thing, and therefore it's nothing to do with the law. And therefore it doesn't protect people from being abused next time round. I do a lot of work with faith organisations, including the Catholic diocese, and I've got to say they've been so proactive. But we had a report quite a while back involving someone who had been performing exorcisms without the diocese knowing, and charging women obscene amounts of money for this process, while also then sexually abusing them. The Catholic diocese, I've got to say, acted extremely proficiently and very proactively. I cannot fault them one bit. However, the police did not in this case. The police NFA'd it, no further action. At source, they didn't even arrest or interview the person involved. They just simply said, it's a cultural thing. We don't get involved in that.
And is that because it was seen more of a consent? It was something that she was consenting to.
Yeah, and the question there was, well, no, she consented to what she believed was an exorcism. Now, I've never been to an exorcism in my life, but I am told of what they do involve, and they do not involve sexual practices. They often involve prayer and talking. They don't all this stuff you see on TV where they dance around and throw water and put amulets on people's foreheads and smoke burns off people and spinning heads and all that stuff is complete nonsense.
Pea soups, I think, usually involve quite a lot.
All that stuff is complete fiction. I am absolutely assured of it. If you were to seek out an exorcism or a deliverance or something similar, you sit down with someone and once it's been authorized, it's literally talking and prayer. That's all it is. Or that's all it should be. So when someone does something differently, then there should be a safeguarding concern, if not crime. Now, in that case I mentioned before, the police had no further action did because they said, well, she consented. Well, my argument was she consented to an exorcism. So that's what she believed it was, but she knew it was wrong, and that's why she went to the police afterwards. The police, I've got to say, did reopen the case following this, and a number of other women have come forward, all saying the same thing. So that just goes to show you why there's a need for a legislation and legal framework and guidance, because it's organisations like police, CPS, who've got nothing to refer to. If I took a case to the CPS right now, saying, Steve's been abused through a ritual process doing X, Y, Z, the CPS are like, well, where's the legal framework for us to refer to? Where's the charging guidelines? Where's the prosecution detail? And without that, they have nothing to work to. They could say, well, Steve's been assaulted, and therefore it's a Section 47 assault or a Section 39 assault, and that's all you're going to get. And the factor that you've been taken there, maybe coerced, manipulated, would never, ever see the light of day in a courtroom because there's no legal framework for it. So that's what we're trying to change at the National Working Group with Parliament, saying there is a need for a legal framework. There is a need for better guidance and things for people to follow on, along with training and understanding. It's all very well me doing all this training around the country. If when people do report it, police saying, well, we've still got nothing to do. We've got no way of recording it.
And it becomes very piecemeal, isn't it? When you're pulling together other pieces of legislation to kind of best fit, you end up with quite a fragmented, like you say, actually a lot of the time it doesn't really reflect what's actually taken place, the abuse that's actually taken place. And like I say, I can see, I can understand from some perspective, maybe the police saying, just going back to that case, maybe the police saying, well, she consented to it. She even paid for it, which is kind of an indication of her consent. So it was there's nothing we can do about it. And I think looking at it from another perspective, you could say, okay, well, if she wanted to get cosmetic surgery and she paid a vast amount of money for cosmetic surgery, and during which she was sexually assaulted, like you say, actually she may have consented, she may have paid for cosmetic surgery, but not the assault that took place within that. And it must be quite frustrating at times, I think, sort of seeing these things sort of taking place. This might be $1 million question, but if you could change one thing within the current legal framework at the moment, maybe that's too narrow a question. I don't know.
No,
is there one thing?
I've got it.
What would you say?
Right now, the controlling coercive behaviour says that you can only be controlled or coerced if you're in, or the abuser is in a domestic setting.
And this is referring to the Domestic Abuse Act.
Yeah, but it doesn't cover people in positions of trust. So faith leaders, community leaders, elders, doctors, nurses. So, if Steve, again, I keep using an example, I'm sorry, but
that's all right. I've got thick skin.
We look at that example of the GP. I appreciate that was a domestic setting, but going back to things like Harold Shipman back in the early 2000s, late 90s, he was in a position of trust and he was controlling and coercive women to give him money and making a lot of money out of it. We don't know what else he did to those women, and I really hope there was nothing more to it. But what we're then seeing is other people then doing that within spiritual and ritualistic settings so that they can get what they want from someone. And it's often women and includes financial extortion as well and sexual abuse. But they're using their position of trust. But because they're not in a domestic setting, it's not controlling coercive behaviour. So that's that's the first thing I would get changed, and that's a big one, because I think if all we need to do is change that legislation that says domestic setting and or position of trust, 4 little words, and or position of trust, and you've got a whole different ball game at court then.
And we're still talking about relationship, aren't we? In its broadest sense of the word, whether that's an intimate relationship or a relationship that you build with somebody. And like I say, if you are involved in faith communities, you are building that relationship with them, and that's part of that relationship.
No, you're absolutely right. And we see it so often, especially in domestic abuse settings, where it is partners who are manipulating often their wives. And we've seen so many murders over the years. There was a case of Ahmed Al-Khatib in 2012, I believe, who murdered his wife because she had red hair and he thought she was a witch. It's unprecedented. There's the pressure and fear that one person can put on another just because of their own beliefs. As we're talking as well, we're talking earlier about how it's unlikely that a victim would disclose the abuse that's taking place, potentially because they may not recognise the abuse. We talked about the importance for agencies, for individuals to be kind of aware of potential indicators, although not sort of narrowing that field to, okay, there are no ligature marks, so therefore it's nothing to worry about, for example. I guess the other kind of spoke to that would be about supporting communities to kind of report instances of child abuse within these communities. So I'm just thinking, how can kind of individuals within faith communities kind of be supported to report instances of abuse whilst being quite sensitive to cultural and religious practices that are involved? So we've got there's essentially 2 answers to this question. The first one, if it's within faith communities like, let's say Catholic or Christianity, I can tell you right now that these organisations have their own safeguarding teams, and there is a reporting process, and you can do that anonymously, or you can do it openly. I'm not a big fan, despite having been a police officer for 20 years, of saying you must report it to the police, because I know from first-hand experience it's a bit of a lucky dip at the moment of whether or not that police officer will take it seriously. I was at a conference just a few weeks ago. There was an officer sat about 5 or 6 seats away from me, and someone was talking about my training that I did. And he was like, no, if I go to that type of job, we just bin it straight away. We don't get in touch with that. We don't deal with that mumbo jumbo.
Right.
And I thought, I wonder how many people have missed opportunities to be safeguarded because that's your attitude. And if that was your attitude, how many other people's attitudes are the same on your team and then in your force? And it's not his fault. He's not had training or awareness. He doesn't understand it, and he's letting his own personal beliefs objectify how he deals with cases. So as much as I'd say report it to the police, be aware it depends who you get or whoever rings up or whoever comes out to that job. So you've got obviously safeguarding practices you can report to within your own faith organisations, within cultures and communities and societies. There are leaders within those societies, but also we have just released a website for the National Working Group. So it's nwgsara.com. So it's National Working Group for Spiritual and Ritualistic Abuse, or nwgsara.com. And on that page, you can also report anonymously to one of the directors or myself here even, who can pick up your referral and have a conversation with you and decide where you want to go next. Do you want to have some support and reporting to police, children's services, adult social services? Here's what you're feeling is abuse. And you can have those conversations without any judgment from myself to see what can we do to support you? Can we help mitigate or act on your behalf if that's what you want? Or do you just need a bit of talking to, someone to listen to, so that you can then find that confidence to go and report it? And then when you do report it, you've got hosts to back you up and say, actually, we can come and get you back if you need to, and provide a bit of a health and education to the people who are taking that report, just in case. This conversation, I hope we have again in 10 years, Steve, and I hope we'll be having a different conversation saying everyone understands it, everyone gets it, no one ignores it, it's on everyone's radar. That's my ultimate goal.
Brilliant. Thank you. And I'll pop those, if you're happy with this, I'll pop those, the contact details in the description for the podcast as well. So
absolutely.
I'm sure that'll pique people's interest. I'm just thinking that if you were to give people listening to this sort of one sort of takeaway, what would be the biggest takeaway you'd want to give them? Don't judge, and always have respect.
your beliefs aren't foolproof. No one's beliefs are foolproof. And if you prejudge someone based upon their beliefs, then you're either going to offend them, or worse yet, you'll lose the opportunity to safeguard them.
Wise words. Brilliant. Thank you, Jordan. So, Jordan, I'm just thinking, if anybody wants to find out more, any sort of websites or any work that you're working on at the moment?
Yep, so we've got the NWG SARA, so that's the National Working Group for Spiritual and Ritualistic Abuse, so that's nwgsara.com. We're also just about to publish our 2024-2026 strategic plan, which will also be available on there. There's a number of different organisations on there. You don't always have to come to myself. You can go, there's a number of organisations you can approach and work with, a number of different people who are keen to help and provide support out there. If organisations are listening to this, please do get in touch with me. We are always keen for more members to join the National Working Group and become part of a bigger, better sharing agreement and best practice forum that we can then obviously then assist Parliament in changing things for the better for everyone out there to be safeguarded.
Fantastic. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Again, I'll put those links in the chat in the description for everybody to refer back to afterwards. Well, Jordan, thank you so much. It's been absolutely fascinating talking to you, and thank you so much for the work that you do on a kind of more local level and a national level as well with the working group there. I think it's so important in an area that I think often a lot of people aren't really kind of widely aware of.
Thank you very much for having me today, Steve. It's been wonderful.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jordan. Take care of yourselves.
You too.
As always, if you'd like to find out more details on the topics discussed in today's episode, go to the SSCP website at somersetsafeguardingchildren.org.uk or by following any of the links in the episode's description. If you have any questions or comments arising from today's episode or would like to be involved in future episodes, we really would love to hear from you. So please get in touch with us at theppod@somerset.gov.uk. Once again, I'd like to give a huge thank you to Jordan Alexander from Prism Training and Chair of the National Working Group on Child Abuse Linked to Faith or Belief for taking the time to share his knowledge with us on this absolutely fascinating subject. And as always, I'd like to thank you for listening. My name is Steve Maccabee, and I'm the Training Manager for the Somerset Safeguarding Children Partnership. And I look forward to you joining us again next time at the ThePPod.
Let's work together to help keep children safe.